Welcome to Manifest This, believer versus skeptic. Today we're going to take on a very challenging topic. And this is really tough, Jen. I know that we're probably going to be digging a little bit deeper than normal. We're going to talk about death, dying, and manifestation. And it's always been something that I grapple with. I think death sort of feels to many like a bit of a curtain call, like literally the end. The brain shuts down, the body shuts down, consciousness ceases. It's really harsh, but that seems to be the reality, right?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, Sharon. That finality is what most people experience, and it's deeply rooted in what science teaches us. I mean, one day they're there, the next day they're gone. But honestly, I just can't swallow the idea that the essence of who we are disappears completely. For me, energy doesn't just vanish, it transforms. And so, again, for me, and I've been through the death of my mom in the last 6, 7 months and the death of my dad in the last 10 years. So for me, death isn't, I can't, like, it's not for me the final stop. It's not where it ends, but it's more of a passage or a shift.
Okay, I respect that. But let me put it to you this way. Don't you think that's a bit convenient? We're humans, we're wired to find patterns, especially when we're hurting and going through really challenging moments. When someone dies, we want to cling to certain signs. Maybe it's a song on the radio or a random feather. Our brains often try to create some type of meaning to soften the blow. Isn't that just a coping mechanism rather than the evidence of continuation?
That's a fair point, and I used to think that way too. But what if, like, life is perspective? It's your perspective on something. And so your perspective is that that feather, that song, that memory, that scent is just something that you're forcing. What if it is them? What if it is your past mom or dad or cat or dog? Like, what if it is that? But let me share a personal story about when my dad died. My dad was a massive fire buff, meaning fire engines and fires. He would listen to the TV radio, like he would tap into the emergency lines and he would find what's called the 5 bell alarm fires. That's a big one. And he would go and watch the fire. And I know that sounds kind of morbid, but he was watching the way the firemen would attack the fire and attack the problem. And he would go down to the States to what's called fire musters. And these are where old and new fire engines were brought like to a fair, right? Think of a car fair or even like a fair, but these were all around fire engines. And my dad wanted to go check out the fire engines so badly he would go without my mom.
Your mom was probably relieved.
Yeah, like I can only imagine. I don't think I would have wanted to go either, but my mom never went. And so, ever since my dad died, and my sister does this too, ever since my dad died, every time we see a fire engine, we think of our dad and we think my our dad sent it. Like sometimes these fire engines will show up at the funniest, canniest of moments. So is it a coincidence? Maybe, but the consistency for me is always striking. And it always felt like it was a message from him. So that belief doesn't just comfort me, it changed how I experienced the grief and the shifting into something peaceful and beautiful.
Okay. So, wow, Jen, that's really touching. And I'm certainly not trying to diminish your experience or anybody else's, but I've got to play the role of the skeptic here. So, from that skeptic's perspective, maybe those fire engines are just really well timed occurrences. Our minds are really suggestible. It's one of those things, we talked about if you really love this certain car and you keep seeing it all the time, right? So, if our minds are so suggestible, particularly when we're vulnerable, maybe it's the brain's way of maintaining balance in chaos. And it's not necessarily proof that that consciousness that we have when we're alive still persists.
But I would argue, back to your car example, that every time I see that car I want, the universe is giving me a sign that it is on the way. It's
Okay.
on its way. I'm focused with intentional focus, that it's on its way. So back to death and dying, we're never going to have lab proof answers, but I think about it as a sign that my dad's okay. and that he's
Right.
trying to connect with me. So again, let's go back to the law of attraction. What you focus on, you attract. So isn't that kind of like tuning your frequency to what you want instead of like, so example, I want to think my dad's okay. I want to think he's living the life. I want to think he's riding every fire engine in the sky every day.
Right.
Woohoo! Right? Holding on to the back. That's what I want to think. I don't want to think about fear. So if you're stuck in sorrow and loss, you get more of that heaviness, right? Back to the law of attraction. So if you're stuck in grief and you're stuck in sorrow, you will listen, grief is normal. It's very normal. We all go through it. I think the
Yep.
point though is again, we've talked about this. How long are you going to stay in sorrow? Because you will attract more sorrow. If you look for the gratitude in it, that's where I tend to go. The love, the connection. Surprisingly, you will find signs of healing and synchronicity that will nourish your soul. And I think that's what I see in the fire engines.
Okay. So again, the skeptic coming in that, manifestation can't rewrite the facts. People are going to die regardless of love or gratitude. I wish it was different for all of those that we lost, but, focusing on or manifesting won't stop death itself from happening.
No, and I'm not suggesting that manifestation changes the physical reality of death. What it does is influence the story we tell ourselves about it. And the story deeply impacts how we heal or how we stay stuck. So if you believe that death is an absolute and it can isolate you and it can create fear and despair, especially for our own end,
Right.
right? But embracing death for me, again, the believer, I believe there is a heaven. I believe there is a place where we go, and I believe we all go there. I do not believe that there is a fiery inferno of burning hell. I don't. I don't believe a loving God would put any of their children through that.
Mm-hmm.
And so embracing death is a transformation for me and for many, as it's an ongoing connection. It invites peace and even gratitude into the grieving process. Like the ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We started from nothing. We started from the earth. We go back into the earth. We're all energy and we go back to energy, straight energy.
So, and here's a piece where I know that I have to play the skeptic here, but I'm going to say this. I can
Okay.
believe two things can happen at the same time. I do understand that even from a physics perspective, we are molecules, we are energy. And that energy doesn't just disappear.
Right.
Does it, in my mind, look like angels' wings and people playing harps on clouds? No. Can it look like the energy going back out into the universe, as you said, ashes to ashes, dust to dust? That is still a molecule and a form of energy. And can it be reformed into something else and something different? I will accept that possibility. So that's sort of a personal, not necessarily a complete skeptic's perspective, where I would say I believe when you're dust, you're gone, and that's the end of it. But what I am hearing from your angle is that manifestation really helps to keep that emotional and spiritual connection alive, even beyond the physical. While on a skeptic side, it might be death is about building resilience, it's about making sense of loss and moving forward in a grounded reality. Different approaches, but maybe aiming for the same outcome, which is finding some kind of peace with death.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to the molecule for 2 seconds, we all know the story of water, right? Turn the faucet, the water pours out. If we happen to pour that into an ice cube tray and we stick it in the freezer, it turns into ice. It's transformed. It's still energy. It's still a molecule. It's just transformed. If we then add heat to it and we boil the water, it turns into steam. So it's transformed now 3 times from liquid to frozen solid to vapor. Does that mean it does not exist when it changes form? Of course not.
Right.
So there's the science of what happens to energy. Molecules change depending on what is applied to the molecules or taken
Right.
away from the molecules, right? So
Yeah.
life is taken away from our molecules and we transform into something different.
Okay.
So, believer or skeptic, the core really here is about choosing a meaningful narrative that makes sense for you. Always, it's got to make sense for you. The choice isn't and doesn't erase the pain. We feel the pain, but it shapes how grief unfolds for you and how life blooms afterwards. It reminds me after my dad died, and still today, it's now been 13 years. It's more than 10 years. It's 13 years this year, and it doesn't hurt any less 13 years
Mhm.
later. Choosing to see those fire engines has a as it's a sign. It's helped me to reconnect to life's beauty and to remember him. And maybe that's all it is for you skeptics.
Right.
Maybe it's just a constant reminder. Instead of having a picture frame, it's living in my everyday world. There's not a day that goes by that a fire engine doesn't show up. And I have that tiny happy memory. But reconnecting to that beauty, that love, rather than retreating into despair all the time, I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I can really see the value in that. And from the skeptic side, really facing the finality often helps people just focus on the here and now, cherishing the time we have with people and building that resilience, saying the things you need to say in life or in the last months if you're granted those last months with knowing that something is imminent, just really cherishing that time and building it. And maybe both perspectives are really what's essential. There's just an offering of different shades of hope.
Yeah, for sure. And, something that I think we don't talk about enough that's part of death is the dying process. It's the time before death. That process of dying itself in those final days, it can be incredibly challenging. I've just gone through it in this year, not just for the person facing the death, but for their loved ones, watching your mom in a bed, knowing that you've got death and dying palliative nurses on board with you, helping you to create a great environment for death. Like, if you think about it, it's pretty scary. Watching someone that we love decline is really hard. But if we can focus on the connection and the gratitude and listen, in today's day and age, death and dying can be such a beautiful experience, so well maintained, so well monitored. So even amidst that fear and uncertainty, the dying process can transform the experience for everybody involved. Holding space for love and forgiveness and meaningful goodbyes are powerful. Even the actual process of dying, like I remember when the nurse said to us, "Oh, your mom's now jaw breathing." And jaw breathing is when she was still grasping for breath, but her jaw would move out like that. And that was called jaw breathing. And those
Sticking out
signs,
her chin while she breathed.
sticking out
Yeah.
her lower jaw, and those signs of death being imminent. For me, it was so peaceful to know that that was normal and that she was being cared for, and just holding that space for her, just being there, calm, knowing this was all a normal part of life. It was going to happen inevitably, not just to her, but to us. We get
Yeah.
to reflect on that. And I think that those goodbyes can be very powerful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that part is really so hard. I've experienced it a few times. And, watching someone decline and being there in their last moments and knowing the end is here. Shout out to palliative care nurses all over the world who do the most amazing job. And quite
They
frankly,
do.
there's amazing, heroic people out there who do everything they can to ensure people remain on this earth. But I think, the palliative care nurses are the unsung heroes who often help us and help our loved ones be escorted off the earth. And I think it can feel really, really overwhelming. And, being realistic in these moments is sometimes really hard because you're really emotional around it. You've got also preparing for what's ahead practically, um, and making the arrangements that need to be made. And sometimes when you're supporting someone while they're watching their loved one die, stepping up and stepping in to help. Those are sort of all the practical things. And some people move into total practicality mode. But, I think one of the pieces that you said, which is significant, is having honest conversations with people at this moment. I think oftentimes, whether we're too polite or we're too afraid or we're too concerned about offending someone, these are the moments I think to say to somebody you care about, regardless of whether you think you're going to see them or see a fire engine or what have you in the future. these are the moments to say you made a difference in my life. And I think that's what helps escorting people through this process and supporting, autonomy where possible and easing some of those anxieties.
Yeah, I mean, I think death and dying is different for everybody, and everybody has a different comfort level around all of those things. One of the things that's also really important is self-care during those times,
Definitely.
both for the dying and for the caregivers. Grief starts before death often. I I was quite emotional at my mom's deathbed, but to be honest with you, I grieved more 10 years ago when my dad died because my mom died that day too. Her spirit died. And so that grief for me had been going on for decades. So when the final death moment came, I was almost relieved because I'd been grieving her for years. And,
Wow.
and that's real too. So grief many times starts before death, sometimes in my case, decades before death. But, practices like staying present, I'm a big journaler, journaling out how you feel, what things affect you. Even the most planned deaths can piss you off. Like the people that are in the room. Are the right people in the room? Are you able to express yourself because of the people in the room? Simple moments, grabbing what you can, maybe going out for a quick walk in nature. It can help stabilize these emotional storms because the vibes are so great out in nature.
Right,
Right?
right.
Energy is good in nature, and so sometimes just a quick walk outside can really help you
Yeah,
in
and I
those tough
guess,
times.
that practical angle of having support systems, whether it's friends, family, or professionals, that's absolutely huge. The care, the counseling, spiritual support really guides families through complicated emotions and logistics. And no one should have to face it alone. Even if you don't have someone exactly by your side, it's that reach out to other people. Because, oftentimes people will say, how can I help? Or what do you need? Or I'm here if you need me. And even that can be overwhelming for people. It's
Totally.
being asked the question is yet another burden on someone who's already going through a burden. And I think we also have to conduct ourselves, if we're not the ones experiencing it, but want to support a loved one or a friend in terms of taking that mental burden off of them.
Yeah, but I can get pretty spicy about this topic because
Tell me.
I just don't think that my final moments with my mom were the way I would have chosen it if I could have.
Okay.
But, I just want to pivot back to death. Death is a very private thing. Like, I think about every cat I've ever owned didn't die in the living room. They died in the closet.
Right.
Well, they died in the vet, but they went to the closet. They went away from the pack. They went away. And of course, for animals, it's they don't want to attract any bad stuff to the dying carcass because, of course, that would be bad for the tribe or the, what do you call it? Packs. But like animals know, they know when they're dying and they don't want to die in public and they want to die in private. And it's such a private thing. And I think that death teaches us something profound about dying and about living and being fully present. And listen, when the cats go away, they don't want to be present anymore. They want to go do their thing. So, but it doesn't take away the fact that we loved them fiercely and we loved, in my case, my mom and dad fiercely and accepting the mystery of life. Whether you can lean into the belief or whether you have to lean into skepticism or somewhere in between, honoring the journey with authenticity and care is what really matters.
I hope it helps our listeners face really challenging conversations with a lot more courage and a lot more compassion. And I love, that you mentioned authenticity and caring around all of this and having those conversations that need to be had. And however your loved one, once they've left the earth, chooses to give you a message. I mean, we're talking about death and dying, but even when we're in love, a song's going to come on the radio and make our hearts skip a beat or have a little heart squeeze because it reminds us of someone who's still with us and alive. So I guess the other way of looking at it is, if it works for love, why wouldn't it work for death?
100%. And, as I always say, sometimes we have to rewrite the story. And
Right.
we can rewrite the story of death. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom and horrible. And it can be beautiful, memorable, joyful, blissful, and full of good stuff. So, everybody, thank you for tuning in today. Remember, however you relate to death, you have room to create meaning and peace and a story in the process. It's a journey. We're all on it together, all gonna die someday. And so, may we just live today in the most beautiful way we can.
Thank you, Jen. That's a wonderful way to let us know that we're all going to have our final chapter. It's the one thing we can't get away from. But it was a difficult but beautiful conversation, and I appreciate your perspective on this. So thanks, listeners, and thanks for listening to Manifest This, Believer versus Skeptic. And we'll drop another one next week. It's been exciting and fun. Thank you.